Megalopolis might be the most divisive and controversial film of the year. That can be reflected in the low ratings given by critics and general audiences alike on Rotten Tomatoes, and an average rating of 2.4 on Letterboxd, which is surprising to say the least. For a film directed by Francis Ford Coppola, the auteur behind notable works like The Conversation, Apocalypse Now, and The Godfather. What's even more striking is that the negative reception is not universal, with top reviews and articles either dismissing it as a confusing mess or hailing it as a visionary masterpiece, with some viewers doing both simultaneously. This polarized reception perfectly reflects the nature of the film itself. Whether we like it or dislike it, one thing is certain: Megalopolis is unusual, be it in its content and delivery, or in the circumstances of its production. One easily knows they're going to watch something exceptional for the simple fact that it's a film that operates outside the traditional Hollywood studio system, being entirely financed by Coppola himself, who had no interest in generating profit from it. At the same time, it is not exactly similar to art house or experimental films we're used to, as its budget sits around $120 million, resulting in an expensive work that looks like a blockbuster. This unique production context partially answers the question lying at the heart of this video. Megalopolis sounds, looks, and feels the way it does because it's the first of its kind in terms of production. But if you've seen the movie, you might still be looking for a more substantial answer as to why it is like this. What exactly was behind its formal and stylistic choices, and what was its core message and ideological drive? In answering these questions, we can at least understand why it had these conflicting reactions. The most important key to understanding Megalopolis is found in its form. From very early on in the film, it is emphasized to us that this story is a fable. This serves as a guide that can help us make sense of the film. The answers to our most puzzling questions can be found in its nature as a fable, specifically in the characteristics of that form of storytelling. A fable is a fictional story that is characterized by its allegorical nature. Megalopolis lives up to this aspect by operating as this retro-futuristic narrative set in the fictional city of New Rome that is on the brink of collapse. The story revolves around Cesar Catilina, a visionary artist who wants to create a utopian community called Megalopolis using this revolutionary invention of his, a building material called megalon, as well as his ability to stop time. What stands in the way is this corrupt ruling establishment with the Mayor Franklyn Cicero at the top. We will learn later that Catalina is an allegory for art and artists, and that the mayor symbolizes the rulers of our modern society. But overall, this setup is supposed to be an allegory for the United States and the current events taking place in it that, according to Coppola, will be leading to its fall, one that is similar to that of the Roman Empire.
And to realize that America was Rome today, that America had been founded on Rome. America's going through the same thing Rome did thousands of years, and we may lose the Republic.
This detail is explicitly communicated in the film very early on, and by explicitly, I mean we see and hear the parallel between the American Republic and the Roman Empire explained to us through writing on the wall that is read out loud by the narrator. So while the movie maintains the allegorical nature of a fable in essence, it still strays away from its traditions, as allegories in fables are not supposed to be as explicitly spelled out. Another crucial characteristic of a fable is its cautionary tones. Fables usually serve as cautionary tales, warning us against certain practices and behaviors through the consequences faced by their characters. That is clearly the case here, since the Roman Empire is facing its downfall, and we do see an allusion to that through this scene of an abandoned Soviet satellite floating in the atmosphere of the Earth. This indicates the threat that this satellite poses in destroying the current empire, and also gestures towards the very recent fall of another empire, if one can say that, which is the USSR. We see then that Megalopolis lives up to the fable narrative by being cautionary and allegorical, but there remains one important characteristic that would truly set it apart as a fable, and that is the moral lesson. At the heart of this film that presents itself as a fable, we need to be looking for its core message. In order to understand it, we need to figure out what it's trying to say. What is the moral of the fable? Identifying the moral lesson of the film would require us to do an ideological analysis from within, meaning of its text, but also from the outside, as in the cultural and political context in which it was made, including the filmmaker's background. We've already established that Megalopolis is political in nature by virtue of it being a reimagination of the fall of the Roman Empire, and even more so with the parallel Coppola draws with the current political climate of the United States. What we need to identify next is what exactly marks this political setting. What is Coppola trying to warn us from through his movie? One thing that the director identifies as a threat in our modern world is the potential rise of what he refers to as the neo-right or fascist tradition. That's something he emphasizes during the Cannes press conference.
You know, there is a trend happening towards the more neo-right, even fascist tradition, which is frightening.
The film does indeed reflect some of these anxieties. That's why we see the character Claudio forming a fascistic street movement with obvious signs of fascism, like swastikas, Confederate battle flags, and even some signs in the rallies that say, "Make New Rome Great Again," so the movie isn't even subtle about that. But as we will see later, it's not that simple. Now, beyond these very specific groups and ideologies, Coppola also gestures towards what seems like an even broader issue within our society. We see that in this interview he did with Screenslate. There have been things that may have evolved badly over the last 10,000 years, and what I observe is a world of unfulfilled, unhappy people who live in a place where we spend $8 trillion a year on advertising, which is trying to sell happiness to these unhappy people. In order to be good customers, those people have to be unhappy. I wonder, has the system evolved so that we are kept unhappy? As we see from this statement, Coppola's view might come across, at first glance, as bold, even bordering on radical, as it puts under question an entire system, capitalism, presumably, which is unusual for American cinema. But it would make sense considering he has complete creative control over the film, and thus the freedom to express his positions, however radical they might sound, especially knowing the struggles he had to go through previously in the traditional Hollywood system, like debt and bankruptcies. We're inclined to believe that even more when we learn that some of the strongest influences on the film are these 4 books that Coppola shared on his Instagram page, 3 of which are written by David Graeber: Debt, Bullshit Jobs, and The Dawn of Everything. This is interesting considering that David Graeber was a well-known anarchist, and his 3 books present a radical reinterpretation of economic history, critique modern capitalism, and challenge established narratives about the development of civilization and social inequality, respectively. So going into the movie, it wouldn't be out of touch to expect a bold and radical commentary on the systemic issues that threaten to destabilize our modern society, especially knowing that, again, the ideological limitations that Hollywood studios usually impose on filmmakers do not exist in this scenario. But does Megalopolis really live up to these expectations? One article by Simon Magdalen on Freedom News tries to explore this by answering the question, did David Graeber really influence Francis Ford Coppola's vision of the film? The short answer is, not exactly. The article argues that searching for Graeber in Megalopolis is somewhat difficult, unless Coppola's reading of Graeber was a shallow misreading. For Megalopolis, politics is absolutely central to the film's theme and message. It is at once a story about an empire in decline and a society in renewal. But as we will see, this renewal is ambiguous. It's clear that Megalopolis does try to impart something Graeberian in its viewers. The pledge to humanity at the end imparts a kind of common loyalty to humanity that implies a certain treachery to nation-states and empire. But this grand vision of a common humanity seems undermined by Caesar's design authority mowing down the homes of working people. It's unclear what Megalopolis means by this, since the theme of hypocrisy is not particularly present in the film, nor is Caesar presented as particularly hypocritical. Ambiguous, unclear. These words don't reflect solely the experience of the writer of this article, but that of many other viewers, including myself. The common feeling seems to be that the movie tries to point to these systemic issues threatening the modern world, but it doesn't sound that interested in substantially exploring them. This ambiguity that surrounds Megalopolis' ideological messages can be once again explained through statements made by Coppola himself. Let's go back to his interview with Tom Power and listen carefully.
So all I'm saying is that the horrors of our world are unnecessary. It's our system we have to talk about. And it's not like we should have communism or something. Those systems have also problems.
The key word in this statement is talk. Once again, Coppola does acknowledge a problem with our entire system, but doesn't seem to be interested in exploring it beyond an invitation to talk about it. This brings us to another crucial aspect of the ideological makeup of the film. Now that we have identified the problem the film is warning us from, it's time to look at the solutions. What does Coppola want us to do about it? At the heart of the philosophy driving Megalopolis, we find a fundamental belief that seems to reflect Coppola's vision, and that we can see reflected in the words of Catilina, when he says at some point in the film, "Should we just accept this endless conflict that we live in now? Wasn't it human friendliness that stimulated our brains by learning and enabled us to outcompete all other species on Earth? How else could such a slow maturing species make it through the Ice Age? How could such few weak bipedal apes evolve more costly brains, smarter brains than other apes, and do it without reproducing so slowly they go extinct?" In these words, there are 2 points we can underline. The first one is on conflict versus friendliness. One key to our success in moving forward as a society, according to Catilina, is in cooperation, something that we will discuss further later. But a second point is that the human species is simply extraordinary. These lines suggest that humans are gifted with a genius mind that will allow us to overcome any challenge we might be facing, as long as we cooperate. This had been emphasized by Coppola in many interviews.
We are a genius species. We can't waste one another. We all have unique talent. There's not a problem that we face that we do not have the ability to solve. Someone has to say that. The world could be a joyous place of us just basically being creative together instead of all of this misery and death.
We can say that part of the lack of interest in meaningfully and sharply exploring any of the systemic issues Coppola gestures towards is his trust in humanity to find solutions for any problem and by any means. He doesn't provide the means or the solutions himself beyond necessity to work together, but he's certain we have the capacity to solve any of the problems facing us. That's something he comments on at length in his interview with Screenslate. There is no problem that we can't solve if we just look at it and use our genius to solve it. We can solve the problems of the climate, we can solve taking care of people and that no babies will die, whether it's Ukraine or Palestine. It's absolutely absurd, and the only reason they keep doing it is because they don't allow us to say we're geniuses. They say, you can't be that. There's a line in the film, we're in need of a great debate about the future. We need everyone in the world to take part in that debate, and we need every question to be able to be asked. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying anything other than that. I'm saying it's time to talk about it, and to talk about it with everybody. From this statement, we see that Coppola is not only confident about the human race's ability to overcome the challenges facing it, but also about the solution that he thinks will be effective. A solution that cannot be clearer. If you've watched the movie and wondered about Catilina repeatedly saying that all that we need to do is have a debate about the future,
we're in need of a great debate about the future!
and whether that idea was supposed to have any deeper meaning or layers or a sense of irony, it turns out you don't really need to think that much of it. It is exactly what it sounds like. As Coppola has stated, that's all he's trying to say. That's the thesis statement of the film. We all need to participate in this great debate about the future and ask questions about the solutions. What Coppola doesn't explore, though, is why we aren't doing that. And why is it that not all of us have the right to participate in that debate? If we take the thesis of Megalopolis in mind when we try to make sense of the previous points evoked on the politics of the film that felt ambiguous, things start to make much more sense. It's true that Coppola sees a threat in the increase of right-wing or fascist views, but that isn't sharply explored in the film because it's simply not at the center of its narrative. It might be the director's personal political view, yes, but what's more important for him is that we have the discussion, regardless of our ideological differences. This explains all the contradictions we find in the politics of the film that many viewers have noted being confused by. That can be seen in the portrayal of Cesar Catilina, who is embraced as a genius with a genuine desire to build a better world for the people, but it is those same people that he leaves homeless after destroying their houses to build his grand project. On the other hand, what can arguably be the antagonist of the film, Mayor Cicero, is equally contradictory, as he presents some very sound ideas about providing housing housing, food, and education to people, but at the same time, his own big project is to build a casino. Another contradiction in the movie is that it seems to be pointing to the injustice and corruption caused by an elite ruling class, but at the same time, it introduces a fascist uprising by working class people, who are led by this figure that also presents a contradiction. Claudio, who is supposedly a fascist, but also seems to be queer-coded, as some viewers have pointed out. All of these confusing choices regarding ideology are better understood when you learn that Coppola deliberately inserted them this way, not just in the text of his film, but also in its production. That's why he clarifies in the Cannes conference, when he discusses his personal views and then points to the fact that he had no problem hiring Jon Voight, who is known to be a Trump supporter. The same political figure that Coppola openly criticizes and even misleads us to think, as we've seen earlier, that the movie is mainly a criticism of him and his supporters, when he talked about the rise of the neo-right. On that, he says, "I didn't want them to say, oh, it's a woke movie, it's just a political thing. We're above politics in making the film, I thought, and yet, still, we all liked each other and participated and made this film together. So I'm hopeful that we can work even with people who disagree with us to achieve a higher goal." The movie calls specifically for audiences to have a debate about the future, and they want everyone to be in on that debate, and they want no questions to be not permitted. As we see here, that's the core message of the film. To project it onto its inspirations, it makes perfect sense now that Coppola hardly explores David Graeber's ideas. He might have been personally interested in them, yes, but Coppola seems to be more interested in the fact that Graeber talks about them and opens this debate about the future. The focus is not the ideas themselves, but the dialogue and the discussion about them. One other element that this context explains is the vision of the utopia that is presented in the film. It's literally titled Megalopolis, so this utopia should be at its center. Reason why, people have tried to make sense of what the film's idea of this utopia is, and they were mostly disappointed. One, for the fact that it's barely explored to begin with. Beyond these move-in walkways and some comments about everyone having a personal garden, many viewers have pointed out how the design of the city is laughable. Well, the truth is, it is indeed laughable and blurry and superficial, because the film doesn't care about the utopia itself or its design, but instead it wants just to talk about it. It suffices to listen to Catalina's words to understand that. Well, there's nothing to be afraid of if you love or have loved. It's an unstoppable force. It's unbreakable. It has no limits. It's within us. It's around us. It's stressed throughout time. It's nothing you can't touch. Yet it guides every decision that we make. But we do have the obligation to each other to ask questions of one another. What can we do? Is this society? Is this way we're living the only one that's available to us? And when we ask these questions, when there is a dialogue about them, that basically is a utopia. Now that we've established that the moral lesson of Megalopolis is to talk and have a great debate about the future, we can delve deeper into how we can have that debate. Because Coppola gives us an answer to that as well, and it lies in the film itself. Debating about the future can be done by making art, and this is what Coppola is doing. This helps us understand one of the most remarkable motives of the film, which is the manipulation of time. Coppola provides an insight into that in an interview, and he says, "As you know, I have one foot in theater and one foot in film. It's no big deal to do something like that in a play. When I was doing plays, we would often have actors run in the aisles and deal with the audience. And that is still done. Artists have always controlled time. From the first painting of a gazelle on a cave wall, they were stopping time. And we know that all the arts manipulate time, or combine time and space, or build time and space. So if you're an artist, you control time. If you're a lawyer, you bill by time, which means it controls you. But time is bigger than that. So Caesar's ability to stop time is reflective of the filmmaker's ability to manipulate time through their art. We've already seen how Caesar reflects Coppola in many ways, so this falls in line. Contrary to what many viewers have stated, this film is indeed significantly autobiographical, just like many other late career projects by big directors. Coppola provides one more answer on how we can have a debate about the future. This one is very crucial because it can finally help us understand the formal composition of the film. Many viewers were puzzled as to why Megalopolis looked the way it did. Why was it structured in this bizarre way that can make it feel incoherent? And why are the dialogues and tones and performances all over the place? If you watched the movie and felt like it was created by people who were just fooling around, well, you weren't wrong at all. See, we already know that the film being self-financed would mean absolute creative freedom that can go insanely, and it does indeed look like a work made by a filmmaker who wasn't told no at any stage of its production. But it doesn't stop here. Coppola admits that when it comes to the execution of a film, most of the time he doesn't know what he's doing. He stated multiple times that he doesn't have a clear vision for his films ahead, so he experiments around and sees what works on the spot.
Was making a film that I really didn't know how to make. And when you make a film that you really don't know how to make, the film starts telling you how to make it.
With Megalopolis, he took this approach to an extreme by making it his objective to play around when making the film. It's at once a filmmaking approach, but also a philosophy that drives the narrative. Coppola's final product of a film is as unserious as Cesar Catilina's final delivery of his Utopia. As we've established earlier, Coppola's strongest belief is that we, the human species, have this natural genius that we should trust in order to create a better future. So what he did was he trusted his own genius and played around as he was making the film. The fact is that we human beings do our best work when we play. When we play with our kids and when we invent things for them. How do you think the wheel got invented? No one knows, but I know they used to move big things around in ancient times on trees, and they were playing with their kids, and they made a toy the kid could pull. And it had some little twigs, but it didn't really work. So someone made little wheels on a little toy cart, and a kid could pull it. And then someone looked at that, said let's make a big one. We do our greatest work, we human beings, when we play together. So let's not be so serious. Let's play together and be joyous together, and it will invent the wonderful future. As we see here, Coppola's core belief is reflected in the way he presented the film and its themes, but it goes beyond that. It was also reflected in the making of the film, which resulted in the unusual formal choices and performances that we end up seeing. As Coppola explains, his strategy with actors is to have fun and play games. Actors never knew what I was going to ask them to do, which is part of the fun of it. The fun of working with actors is that in the space where you are, which is say here, you can't get in trouble, right? You can't be bad, right? In other words, we're gonna play together and we're gonna have fun together. Needless to say, that performances in the film show that, indeed, the actors were having a lot of fun.
1, 2, 3, yippee yay.
Now, knowing all of this about Coppola's philosophy, ideology, and approach to filmmaking, how do we make sense of the ending of Megalopolis? Well, if the core message is to have a great debate about the future that we should have despite our differences, that's what happens at the end. Caesar and Julia getting married signals that kind of unification between the two sides that were at odds throughout the film. And now they'll gather in this utopia where they'll probably have a debate about the future. This unification explains why the institution of marriage was emphasized by Caesar earlier in the movie. It makes sense that he says that since it leads to the creation of children. And as we have established, children are important. They play around and contribute to innovation because of their natural human genius. That's why the movie ends with a child, and Coppola clarifies that. The film ends with a baby as the only element of the last shot that's moving, because the thing the characters in the film care about is the future. Their child is the future. The movie starts with a guy stopping time. Time has stopped at half dozen places in the movie, and it's appropriate that it stops at the end, but with the children. So in short, the moral lesson of the film is nothing more than this invitation to have a great debate, ask questions, and play together like children to build a better future, as we successfully did for thousands of years thanks to our natural genius. Depending on your background and political positions, you might find this message unbelievably naive, superficial, and childish. In that case, Megalopolis can shield itself by referring to the first element we pointed out at the beginning of the video. Once again, it's a fable. And fables are mostly for children. So their moral lessons tend to be simplistic, universal, and timeless. If this film sounded childish to you, that's actually the point. I hope this video helps understand the vision behind the film, regardless of whether we think it's genius or incredibly stupid.